Welcome to the first installment of the True Blue podcast, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers podcast here on G Show Productions. I'm your host, Graham, the G Show Forsyth. Thanks for tuning in on this Banjo Bowl Saturday. It's a big game coming up today against the Bombers, taking on the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Just a couple things before we get things rolling here. This podcast is sponsored by our two newest sponsors, our two only sponsors at this point, in Mid-Canada Fasteners and Tools, your one-stop shop for all your industrial needs. Check out their locations in Brandon and Winnipeg today, and also you can visit their website at madecanadafasteners.shop. We're also sponsored by Terrico. It's a locally owned independent retailer that has been serving Manitoba producers for over 80 years with locations around Winnipeg. Terrico provides a wide range of products, from liquid fertilizers to seed and crop protection products and quality mobile lubricants. Visit their website at terrico.ca today to check out what they're all about in more detail. But I'm super excited for this podcast, the official Bombers podcast on G Show Productions. There's a lot of great stuff that we got in store from here on out until the end of Winnipeg season, and every Friday we're doing this one on Saturday just to kick things off. And since it is the Banjo Bowl, I thought it was only right to do an episode for this game specifically. But yeah, I'll be joined by guests every Friday to break down past games from the Winnipeg Blue Bombers in the past week, as well as talking about all the up-to-date news going around on the team, as well as previewing and highlighting the big stuff coming up for the upcoming games for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. We're also going to be doing some tailgating. We're going to be starting off today by cooking some hot dogs on that fireplace behind me. But to start things off, we're going to go through some highlights for you guys to check out of last week's Labor Day Classic in Saskatchewan, where the Bombers fell 32-30. You're watching the True Blue podcast on YouTube at G Show Productions, as well as listening to it on Spotify. Enjoy, everybody. The game started off with a surprise as Brett Lawther onside kicks and recovers the football himself to give the Riders the first possession of the game on offense. Later in the quarter, Collaros forces a high pass intended for Rashid Bailey, but can't beat the coverage of Nick Marshall, who's all over the route, and intercepts the pass. This extended Collaros' interception streak to 6 games. Saskatchewan would later on settle for a field goal on the drive as they take an opening 3-0 lead in this game. On to the second quarter now. Dolegala connects with Tavon Jones from the end zone on an out route and turns it into a big 64-yard play. After that, Dolegala comes right back with a strike to Mitchell Picton on another out route, setting up Antonio Pipkin for a 2-yard TD run. The Riders go up 10-0. But on the ensuing drive, Winnipeg finally finds a spark on offense as Collaros rolls out to the right and finds Dembski for a beautiful one-handed catch. Great concentration there from the Winnipeg-born player. Collaros then rolls out again on the next play and finds Drew Wolodarski his safety blanket in the end zone for a TD. Castillo adds the point after attempt to cut the lead to 3, 10-7 for the Riders heading into the second half. Late into the third quarter now, the Bombers down by 9. Collaros connects on another big play to Dembski as he's falling. Great concentration from number 10 once again, taking Winnipeg inside the 5 just shy of the end zone. Prukop checks into the game and hands it off to Brady Oliveira for his first score of the ball game as the Bombers cut the Riders' lead once again. But into the fourth quarter now, 19-17 for the Riders. Winnipeg punt returner Jamal Parker watches the ball sail over his head into the end zone and proceeds to take a knee to concede a single. The Riders go back up by 3. Then, with the Bombers marching down to Saskatchewan's 5-yard line, Pete Robertson gets a hand on Collaros' pass and then proceeds to make this bad decision.
Unnecessary roughness. Saskatchewan number 45.
The headbutt from Robertson on Collaros ends up sending the Winnipeg QB out of the game for concussion protocol. A unnecessary roughness penalty ends up putting the Bombers half the distance to the goal as Brady Oliveira punches it in for his second TD of the game, and with the Castile point after, the Bombers go up by 4. But then more bad execution from the Bombers' special teams as Jamal Parker lets the ball bounce into the end zone once again and ends up taking a knee to concede a single to have the score only separated by a field goal. The Bombers end up going 2 and out, and Saskatchewan ends up marching down the field thanks to some big plays off of receptions from running back Joe Morrow. It ends up eventually setting up another Lawler field goal as he hits to tie the game, and we're headed into OT. After the Bombers elect to play defense after winning the coin toss, the Riders get the ball first, marching down near the end zone and setting up a punch-in score for Antonio Pipkin. Bill Legala ends up connecting with a receiver for the 2-point conversion, the Riders up by 8. This means the Bombers have to match, and Collaros comes out slinging, making a perfect pass to Kenny Lawler to get the score within 2 points. But it wasn't enough for the Bombers last Sunday, as on the 2-pointer, Jackson Ford gets a hand on Collaros' pass intended for Schoen. That's the ball game as Winnipeg falls 32-30 to the Riders for their first loss in Regina since 2019. Joining me on the True Blue podcast for the pilot episode of this show is Vic Selby. Vic, it's great to have you on the show. Obviously, we're going to be talking about the Bombers in this episode, about their Labor Day Classic matchup against the Saskatchewan Roughriders, and then later on you'll be joining me to end off this podcast to talk about some predictions for the upcoming Banjo Bowl game today. But yeah, for the Bombers, a close one that they lost last week in Regina in the Labor Day Classic on Sunday, dropping it 32-30 in OT. The Big Blue definitely had their chances to win that game, but ended up squandering some opportunities. Your thoughts on the Bombers' loss last week to Saskatchewan?
Yeah, I feel like as is typical with a lot of Winnipeg sports teams, like the reaction has been very reactionary from a lot of fans, panicking immediately, things like that. But honestly, I'm not too worried about it. Like whenever you play in Regina on Labor Day, like it's a tense environment. It's always like you're always getting their best. I'm not too worried about it, honestly. It was a tough loss. You would have liked to win that one, but I don't think it's a bad sign for long term or anything like that. I think the Blue will be just fine.
Yeah, and they're a game away from clinching a playoff spot, which is crazy. That just shows how good this team really has been this season. And it's been 2 out of the 3 losses for Winnipeg where I'd say more so in the Ottawa game where they let it slip away, blowing that lead. In this one last week, I just say from the start, the execution just wasn't great. It wasn't too consistent for the Bombers, but I'm with you. I don't think there should be a sense of total panic with this team. This is a team that lost to Ottawa 1-5 straight before dropping the game to Saskatchewan. And I mean, these are 2 of the biggest rivals in the league. It's one of the biggest rivalries in CFL history. I forget who said it. I think it was Glenn Suter. It's a matchup where you kind of just throw the records out the wayside because these teams always play each other so closely, usually most of the time. And they're always going to bring their best against each other. So where do you think that it exactly went wrong for the Bombers last week in terms of them not being able to get it done in Saskatchewan to extend their winning streak in Regina further? Ended up losing.
Yeah, I think it felt like on a much different scale. It wasn't nearly as bad, but I think it felt a lot like our first loss to BC, to where like, we started off slow, things weren't really going, and I kept just kind of waiting for the talent to kick in and for us just to be better, start doing stuff. And you just kind of assume it's going to happen at a certain point. And it just never fully did. So it felt like that, obviously not nearly as catastrophic a loss as that, but like one game out of every 100 is Kolaros gonna be, have no completions midway through the second quarter. Like that's not something that typically happens. But it's hard to execute in a place like that, in that environment. I think that was our biggest issue. We just didn't get rolling off the bat. Crowd was bumping. We gave them a chance to really rev up, get some energy, and I think from there it was just hard to catch up.
Yeah, and things started off with that onside kick and recovery by Brett Lawther, which, I'm not sure if you could say that set the tone because Saskatchewan was only up 3-0 after that quarter, but that definitely threw a bit of a surprise. I'd say a big shock in how this game started. I think that's how you got to go out and beat a team like the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, is you got to play aggressive, but also know how to stay disciplined. And for the most part, Saskatchewan was pretty disciplined in this game. We'll get into the Pete Robertson suspension, the hit to the helmet, headbutt on Collaros in just a moment here. But yeah, I
Yeah.
feel like this Bombers offense, there's been times as good as they've been where they've started off a bit slow in games, and last week was a good example of that, scoring no points throughout the first quarter. Like you said, Collaros halfway through for most of the first half didn't have that many completions. And yeah, I think that as the game went along, this Bombers team started to lock down more on defense. Collaros and this offense were starting to connect on big plays, but I think the execution down the line really costed the Bombers in terms of those two singles that they gave up in the fourth quarter. Really, two singles that, especially the last one, that you really can't give up by 4, 24-20 at that point before the second single, of course, giving back Saskatchewan a 3-point deficit. And we know how good their special teams are. Bombers go 3-and-out, or 2-and-out, I should say. And then Mari Alford with a decent return. Lawther hits his fifth field goal of the game, going 5 for 5. But I think moving forward this week, I expect the execution to be a bit better for the Bombers. I think that it's going to be another battle on our hands for Banjo Bowl, which we'll talk about later on. But yeah, I think that overall, this isn't a game where, moving forward, the Bombers shouldn't be too worried about that loss to Saskatchewan.
Yeah, no, totally agree.
Let's get into the Pete Robertson suspension. He gets suspended for 1 game after a brutal decision to headbutt Zach Collaros after the play. He actually made a nice play to knock that ball down, but I don't know what was going through his head. Especially on a guy like Collaros, I saw that people, Saskatchewan fans mainly, saying that he kind of sold it, but this is a guy with concussion problems in his history, as well as coming off of a neck injury this season after what happened in Edmonton. But just what was going through your head when you saw that play? I got pretty rattled about it and pretty fired up as well when it happened.
Yeah, no, definitely. I will say, like, Labor Day Classic Sunday, after a few beers, your opinion of it is it's pretty cut and dry. What you think? But like, now watching it back over, it's one of those, like, without question, it's a suspendable play. I'm surprised he only got a game for it nonetheless. Because at the end of the day, it's really hard to argue that that's not an intent to injure on a guy who's had a lot of concussion history in his career. So it was a filthy play that I don't think the CFL has any reason tolerating, and obviously they didn't. What was really interesting to me was how quick the suspension actually happened. It's not too often you get a suspension announcement the next day. So you kind of wonder, like, what was that like? What conversations did they had with him? I know Collaros said in an interview that he did show some remorse, gave him a call, said like it was heat of the moment kind of thing, whatever. And Zach hopes they can move on from it. But I'm curious, like, what happened when the league contacted both guys the day after, and kind of how they came to that conclusion. I'm okay with the 1 game. I'm glad he's not playing today. Would have liked it to be more, I think. Just because, like, it's a head thing. If he had maybe like really shoved him from behind and he fell or something, okay, is what it is. But once you start getting to concussions and things like that, it starts to get a little scary.
Yeah, and it was just
unnecessary, it was dirty, all of the above. And I mean, say what you want about how Caleros ended up acting after it. I mean, he was fired up, rightfully so. You just got hit to the head after, way after the play is done. And I don't think he was really expecting to be headbutted. So I think that, that went into the way he fell after. And I think that it's just late in game for Saskatchewan. It doesn't end up costing them, of course, because the game ends up going to OT, but you just can't do stupid stuff like that if you expect to win, more times than not against a team that is as good as the Bombers are. But I think that the problem I had with it is, yes, the refs made a right call with the penalty, but there's no way Robertson should have stayed in the game after that play. I think he should have been ejected, and I think that the league stepping up and making the right decision to suspend him for at least one game is kind of surprising to me because of what happened to Caleros earlier on in the season against Edmonton, where there wasn't even a penalty, wasn't even a fine on the play where he got hit in the head, hit to the head late, after he released that ball for that interception that he ended up throwing. But this is the best QB in the league, and you got to set a standard for protecting a guy like Caleros. I think that the 1-game suspension is warranted, and Saskatchewan fans are going to point to, well, Jeffcoat didn't get suspended when he popped Brandon Bridge in the head, a few Labor Days ago, and, Andrew Harris didn't get any disciplinary actions for ripping the helmet off of the Saskatchewan player in the Banjo Bowl a few years ago. But I think moving forward, this is something that the league, they can't look at the past. They got to look forward and see what they can do now in a situation like this. And I think it was the right call, at least, to suspend him 1 game. And I am in agreement with you. I am surprised about how fast they came to a decision. I think part of that was how vocal O'Shea and Caleros were about the hit afterwards.
Yeah, for sure. And as far as Sask fans, I mean the whataboutism, it's about what you'd expect for the most part. Like I'm not going to expect a whole bunch of sympathy from the good people of Regina on the field after that happens. Yeah, just not something I expected. But another thing I didn't expect and I was happy to see was actually the reaction from the Saskatchewan sideline. There was some reports that came out after the game of just how fired up the team was, really shoving Robertson around. Apparently coaches had to kind of separate them. I'm not sure if that's necessarily because of the intent to injure or about the huge penalty that almost cost them the game. Could have gone either way, I guess. But I was happy to see the team really step up and condemn that act. If not publicly, at least like privately on the sidelines. Yeah, it's a good step.
Before we let you go here for now, Vic, I want to get your thoughts on what you're expecting, for this Bombers team heading into this Banjo Bowl matchup. Do you expect them to start off fast in this one? What would the expectation be for the Big Blue today at home against the Saskatchewan Roughriders in this classic showdown at Banjo Bowl?
Yeah, I think that we're going to be as fired up as we've been all year. I'm expecting a fast start right from the beginning. I honestly like it might seem overconfident, but after that loss, after the suspension and everything, I think that the Bombers come out fired up, ready to go. I think that we're going to go ahead early and never look back. I'm really expecting a big showing from our offense today. And I think we're going to cruise.
Well, we'll get into predictions about that game coming up to end off the show or later on in the show as it comes to a conclusion. And I'm pretty sure I got a pretty good sense of who you're rolling with in this game today in Winnipeg as the Bombers face off against the Riders in the classic Banjo Bowl matchup. Vic, we'll see you in a bit here on the True Blue podcast.
For sure, man. See you soon.
And that was Vic Selby joining me on this edition of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers podcast, the True Blue podcast here
on the G Show Productions YouTube channel. I hope you guys are enjoying it up until this point. We're going to take a quick break, but you saw our main sponsor, one of our main sponsors, Mid-Canada Fasteners and Tools, being showcased at the bottom of our screen. Be sure to check out their website, of course, at midcanadafasteners.shop, and be sure to check them out. Search up their name on Instagram and Facebook, and you should be able to find them and see what they're all about, the products that they offer. We'll have a promo code involved with them for a deal you guys can get when you visit the shop. You'll have to visit the shop to use this promo code. In the next episode, we'll have that ready to go for you guys. But coming up next, I'm going to be riding solo here for a bit, and I'm going to talk about just some injury updates, talking about the player of the game, in my opinion, from last week's Labor Day Classic on the Bombers side of things, as well as some other stuff on Blue Bombers Nation, this podcast, for the True Blue podcast on G Show Productions. Stick around, everybody. Welcome back to the True Blue podcast. Started off this episode by showing some highlights, courtesy of the CFL's YouTube channel. G Show Productions does not claim or own any of their content. We just used it for entertainment purposes. But welcome back to the show, everybody. We're going to get into who I thought the player of the game was last week on the offensive side of the ball for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Let me just pull it up right here. And that would be Brady Oliveira. And Brady Oliveira last week for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers was breaking tackles, doing all the things he does so well. 17 carries for 88 yards and 2 TDs on the ground, just showcasing the true power that he has as a back in this league. He only had one reception, which was this one, but he took it for 12 yards, was a big part of Winnipeg getting back into this game, as you saw during those highlights, taking in his first score of the game to cut the lead down to 3 at that point, eventually with the Castillo field goal, or PAT, cutting it down to 2, and of course giving the Bombers the lead on this play here, where they eventually ended up squandering it and losing this game last week in Regina. But yeah, it's 3 p.m. now. The Banjo Bowl is just about to start. The Bombers are looking to extend their 3-game Banjo Bowl winning streak to 4 games in this one today. And we'll take a look at the injury update provided by Covers.com. Clements and Briggs, as well as Gauthier and Bixma on the linebackers side, all out for this game. Clements actually probable with a hip today, as well as Briggs is probable with a foot injury that he suffered. We'll see if those guys get some action, but for Gauthier, he is out indefinitely with a hip injury, as well as Bixma out indefinitely with a knee injury. Some other probables for this game, well, there aren't any. Janarian Grant out until early October. DB Darby, he's out indefinitely with an undisclosed injury. Matt Miller is out until mid-September. He's a fullback for this team. Not Matt Miller, but Miller being his last name, out with a shoulder injury until mid-September. Hansen, a defensive end, out indefinitely with an Achilles injury, and Lawrence out indefinitely with an undisclosed injury. But the Bombers, I mean, without those guys that have been out indefinitely, have been, going along pretty well. This is a team that won 5 straight games up until that loss to Saskatchewan last week. A team that's getting it done in all phases of the football game, whether that's on offense, on defense, on special teams. And yeah, it would be nice for this team to get Briggs and Clemens back in this game today, adding to the linebacking core that this team has. Sucks that Janarian Grant is still out, one of the most electrifying kick returners in the CFL. But we'll move on to Zach Collaros now. I think for Zach Collaros, this is a guy that is the best QB in the CFL, in my opinion. But since being back from injury, it seems like he hasn't been seeing the field very well. He had the 3-interception game in Montreal, the week previous where the Bombers played. They end up winning the game 47-17, but Collaros ends up throwing the 3 interceptions, 2 of them being pick sixes. He did have 4 TDs in that game. The completion percentage pretty good for 16 for 24. But last game, it just seemed like he had some trouble getting into a rhythm at points. Feel like maybe play calling has to be adjusted a bit to not go for the big play more so, build up some confidence and get into a rhythm for Zach Collaros, I think would be huge. And this is a guy who we know can manipulate the pocket in so many different ways. He's a guy that arguably, he's better when he gets outside of the pocket and makes those big throws like he did last week. But what I'm expecting from Zach Collaros in this game today is for him to get back to protecting the football. Of course, like already mentioned, on a 6-game interception streak of interceptions thrown, and yeah, that's just something that the Bombers don't need in this game today. Him, throwing interceptions or whether that's 1 or 2, he needs to take care of the football for the Bombers to have their best chance to win today, because Saskatchewan, they're playing with confidence. They've beaten 2 of the top teams in the West in their last time out, and they would love nothing more than to go out in Winnipeg today at the Banjo Bowl and win the season series and win the Banjo Bowl for the first time in a while. It's a 3-game win streak the Bombers have in this game heading into today's contest. As for the defense for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, I think that last week there were some throws that Dolegala was making that were perfect throws, and it was tough for Winnipeg to knock them down if the coverage wasn't, tighter, even though the coverage seemed pretty tight at times. But early on in that game, the Bombers were getting burned with, overcommitting and trying to jump some routes, holes, gaps opened up in the Bombers' D, and things shored up as the game went along for the Bombers. But even then, there were some big plays down the line in the game where there was some missed tackles, and Saskatchewan ended up benefiting from that. I also feel like the Bombers' offense needs to do a better job of controlling, give the defense a bit of a rest so they're at their top level and their top energy and can come out and do the best things that they can do. Willie Jefferson has been big time this season with his knockdowns. He leads the CFL in that category. I expect him to be disruptive again today for the Blue and Gold. And yeah, I expect for guys like Big Hill to keep making the tackles. I think that Demarius Houston is going to be looking to take some the other way, as he's done so all season long. And yeah, I think a guy like, Winston Rose is going to be looking to have a big game as well. And continue to make the sure tackles like he has so far this season. I'll give you guys a bit of an update on what has happened in the CFL so far on this special weekend and the rematches from Labor Day weekend last week. Last night it was the Hamilton Tiger Cats who ended up winning the game 27-24 in a battle against the Ottawa Red Blacks. Hamilton on the season now moves into third at 5-7 as Ottawa continues to be in last place in that conference, that division in the East Division at 3-9. Earlier today, it was the Toronto Argonauts winning 39-10 over the Montreal Alouettes. The Argos moved to 10-1, the best record in the CFL at this point, and the Montreal Alouettes fall to 6-6 at 500. Still second in the East, but Hamilton is right on their tail, and Montreal will be looking to get a home field advantage, looking to secure that as the season goes along, so they have that bit of an advantage in the playoff game, the first playoff game coming up in the East semifinals. But yeah, that's going to do it for this portion of the True Blue podcast. Let me know what you guys are looking forward to the most in this Bombers game. Is it the rematch of these two teams going at it? Are you looking forward to seeing if Saskatchewan, not Saskatchewan, are you looking forward to seeing the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, potentially going out and bouncing back, Collaros having a potential big game, or, will it be another win for Saskatchewan in Winnipeg as they're riding some momentum heading into this one? Fired up to beat a team that's going to be favored over them again in this game, and Saskatchewan playing the underdog role. But by the way, that's our sponsor down there, Terrico. It's a company, of course, that supplies many producers in the Manitoba, in the province of Manitoba. They got a wide variety of products that they can offer. They've been doing it for over 80 years. So be sure to check out their website at terrico.ca. We are going to take a commercial break here, a quick break, and we'll be back with Vic Selby in just a moment here to get his thoughts on the upcoming Banjo Bowl matchup that is just about to start here very soon in Winnipeg, Manitoba. It's going to be a good one. I hope you guys are enjoying it so far. You are watching the True Blue podcast on the G Show Productions YouTube channel. Stick around for more coming up after this transition.
Outside here before we get into our final segment of this edition of the True Blue podcast. In just a little while here, I'm going to be going over to that fireplace, lighting a fire, and cooking some hot dogs for the tailgating part of today's episode. You won't want to miss it coming up at the end, but for now, we're going to take a quick little break before we get into predictions for the upcoming Banjo Bowl matchup with Vic Selby.
Vic Selby joining me again on the first edition, the pilot episode of the True Blue podcast. Vic, you gave some of your thoughts on how you thought the Bombers are going to come out in today's game, what you expect of them. We're going to get into predictions for this game in just a moment. Where would you say are the big three talking points that you are the most interested in? Extend that 3-game Banjo Bowl winning streak to 4 games.
Yeah, honestly, like the thing I'm most excited to see today is how Dolegala performs in Winnipeg. He's had a really successful start to his CFL career, and I think containing him is going to be like probably the biggest key to our success, because I think we're going to score points. It's just a matter of whether or not we're going to be able to stop them from doing the same. This kid has not played in an environment like this yet. Banjo Bowl, at the very least, one of the loudest stadiums in the CFL. I think it's clear what my opinion is. But it's going to be a whole different atmosphere for this kid. And I'm really curious to see if he's able to step up, make plays against us. But I think it starts with our defense for sure. On the other end, I think that a fiery start ourselves is crucial. Getting going, not having that slow start to the game, especially our passing game, like we did last week, would be great. And other than that, I think it's just staying the course, playing our game, staying disciplined. It's huge. Don't get sucked into the stuff that started towards the end of last week. Bombers are the most disciplined team in the league. We win a lot of games because of that. It's going to be important to stay the course on that way for sure as well.
Yeah, and I think that so far in his first two games, Jake Dolegala has shown some promise in Saskatchewan. I mean, is he going to be the long-term solution there? I'm not sure. It's going to be interesting to see, I guess, what happens moving forward this season and once it comes to an end, because of course Trevor Harris on the roster, but he's been missing time due to injury, and they paid him, of course, the big bucks to come in. But I think that what he was doing really well last week was just, making the big time throws, making the big plays when needed. I think that there were some times, especially in the second quarter, we showed it in the highlights early, where the Bombers got caught cheating on some routes, trying to jump them, and got beat. Ended up being a big gain for Austin on that play. But I think that Dolegala has to continue to take care of the football and do what he's been doing best, which has been that so far in his two games. But I do think that the Bombers are going to continue to bat some balls down. Willie Jefferson has been big time in that area, and I don't see them getting burnt as much today on the out routes as they were last game. I think that they got to shore up their tackling a bit. Morrow was going off for some big yardage plays on some dump passes. So I think the Bombers need to clean that up. I think they will. I think that you mentioned the environment. This is an environment Dolegala hasn't faced yet. He hasn't played in yet. And I think that the Bombers could use their crowd, that momentum, to help them out in this game, to give them that extra energy that they didn't have last week playing in Saskatchewan in that hostile environment. But the biggest thing is, I think Zach Collaros needs to show that he is still Zach Collaros again. A 6-game interception streak for him. I think that's something he wants to break. I talked about it earlier in the show. How Collaros, he's been forcing a lot of balls where he could either just throw it away or go to another receiver. I think that he needs to play with a clear mind today. He needs to see the field better, and I think that Zach can do that, and I could see that happening today. I think it needs to be less about the big plays, which it's nice to go for the big plays, but more of those checkdowns, more of those shorter routes to get yards. I think relying on Brady Oliveira and that O-line to run is going to be something that the Bombers could start off with to get the ball rolling. I think that they've been excellent this season, no doubt about it, when running the football, and that O-line has been opening up holes for Oliveira to get going. And he's just been getting better and better as the season goes along, but also better execution from the Bombers today. They got to execute better. They
outside here before outside here before we get
and a 6-game interception streak for him. I think that's something he wants to break. I talked about it earlier in the show. How Collaros, he's been forcing a lot of balls where he could either just throw it away or go to another receiver. I think that he needs to play with a clear mind today. He needs to see the field better, and I think that Zach can do that, and I could see that happening today. I think it needs to be less about the big plays, which it's nice to go for the big plays, but more of those checkdowns, more of those shorter routes to get yards. I think relying on Brady Oliveira and that O-line to run is going to be something that the Bombers could start off with to get the ball rolling. I think that they've been excellent this season, no doubt about it, when running the football, and that O-line has been opening up holes for Oliveira to get going. And he's just been getting better and better as the season goes along, but also better execution from the Bombers today. They got to execute better. They weren't at their highest level last week in Saskatchewan, and I think in a battle, the execution matters even more so when teams like these two play each other, and I think that execution was a bit lacking from the Bombers last week.
Yeah, no, definitely. And on that Brady note, I think he deserves some love. He was fantastic last week, as he has been all year long. I have so much faith in this guy. He's also what 10 yards away from 1,000 on the season.
Yeah.
Uh, so I think I expect him to get that really early. I'm hoping there's an announcement, some cannons in the stadium, get things going a little bit. But yeah, I think he's going to be big for us today. But at the end of the day, we're going to win this game because of our passing game, and it needs to be that way. I agree with you. Like, I think you kind of said the quiet part out loud a little bit about Kalaros. I think that a lot of Bomber fans, we haven't really talked about the fact that he has been throwing a lot of interceptions this year. Like, there have been more mistakes, more things like that than typically, and it's not something I'm panicking about. But it's definitely the case. Yeah, like what'd you say, 6 games in a row with an interception?
Yep.
Yeah, that's quite something for sure. I'm not too worried about it yet. But yeah, getting those under control will be crucial because in games like this, big rivalry ones, turnovers and penalties are the two things that are going to kill you. And we got to make sure to be careful with both of those.
Yeah, and going back to that game against Montreal where he had his most interceptions thrown in a game this season, the
Mhm.
three, we were able to come out of it because of how good this team is around him and how they've
Yeah,
been able to execute. And that just wasn't the case last week. And, he only threw the one interception, which was a forced ball, picked off by Nick Marshall. But of course, that execution was lacking overall for the Big Blue. I think that, I'm one of Zach Collaros' biggest supporters. I think he's still the best quarterback in the league, and he is
as
coming
do I.
off of that neck injury. So I think he's taken a bit of time to just get back in the groove of things. I think the more reps he gets as the season goes along, the better for him. And yeah, I expect him to come out and have a statement game today against Saskatchewan. I think that, he's going to trust in the team around him, the talent that he has, like guys like Dalton Schoen, Kenny Lawler, and Nick Dembski. And I think that, he is going to come in extra motivated in this game today, especially with how it ended, having a shot to tie it up and extend the OT last week. And that just didn't happen with the nice knockdown by Jackson Ford on Saskatchewan there. But yeah, I expect the big plays still, and I expect a bit more consistency from Zach Collaros, not at the 50% mark completion percentage. And I expect them to start off strong and consistent in the pass game today.
For sure. Yeah, no, I think today's gonna be a big game for us. Coming up even next week, we have Hamilton, and then we have a nice bye week before that big game against Toronto, biggest game of the year. Um, so yeah, no, I think the Blue are gonna be out in full force today. We also have some guys potentially coming back. I'm not sure if it's been fully announced yet, but I remember seeing Clements, Briggs, and Gauthier all practicing. So they all are questionable for today's game. I'd love to see a couple of those guys back as well. Could be nice, add a little bit of life in that team there, and especially on the defensive side of the ball. But yeah, I'm expecting a good showing from the boys today. They're gonna be ready to go. I'm ready to go. I'll be there. I'm not sure if you'll be there, but yeah, I'll be absolutely ready to go.
It'd be awesome to be there. I got to get to a Banjo Bowl game one of these days because the environment always does look electric. We are going to end off with some predictions. A prediction of the game, what you feel that the score is going to be, who you think wins it, before I let you go here a bit.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you know what? It's funny. Like the longer we talk, the more like my prediction evolves. Because I was coming into this ready to say like, yeah, I'm fired up. We're gonna whoop them, whatever. I do think we're going to win, and I think we're going to win by multiple touchdowns. But I don't think we're looking at a, you know, 45-16 massacre or anything like that. I'm not expecting something like that. It's the Banjo Bowl. Everyone's gonna be at their absolute best, I think. I would predict at this point something like, let me go like 35-18 sounds right to me. I think the Bombers are going to win in a big way, but I don't think it's going to be necessarily as easy as the scoreline will suggest by the end. I just think that in the second half of the game, we're a second half team. We're going to come out, we're going to perform, and I think that at the end of the day, we're going to pull ahead.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same thinking the same mindset as you around that 35 to 18 score. I'm gonna go with Bombers winning the game 37 to about 37-24 today. I think that this is going to be a close game for, the first 3 quarters, and I think in the fourth quarter is where the Bombers are going to really pull through. I think that big thing today is going to be that D line from Winnipeg getting the pressure on Dolegala, knocking down balls, just making him feel uncomfortable.
Definitely.
Back there. I think that the Bombers, the biggest thing that they're going to need to do is shore up the tackling, as compared to last week. And I think on offense, like we've already talked about, getting into a rhythm offensively, not going for the big play as much, running the rock with Brady Oliveira, as that's been so successful all season long. He averaged 5.2 yards per carry last week on 17 touches. Of course, looking for that consistency to come back that high level of Zach Collaros. Special teams, I expect them to not have the same gaffes in terms of letting the ball go into the end zone instead of taking it out, and not allowing those single points. And yeah, I just expect better execution overall from the Bombers in this game today. Still the same disciplined Bombers team. And yeah, I think Saskatchewan's going to give them another battle, but the Bombers pull away, use the crowd to their advantage, the great energy that is brought at IG Field on a consistent basis. And yeah, see this game being a score of 37 to 24 for the Bombers, and taking home their 4th straight Banjo Bowl matchup, extending their 3-game winning streak to 4.
Yeah, Bears, can't wait. Yeah, hope one of us is right at least. Either way, honestly, it's Banjo Bowl. Like I'll take 35-34. It doesn't matter to me. We just need a win.
Yep, no doubt about it. And it would be a shame if they lost this game today, because that would mean Saskatchewan wins the season series, which hasn't happened in a while. I think the Bombers have owned the season series for the past few years here. But Vic, you enjoyed the game today, man. I'm gonna be watching, of course, and from my couch, that is, compared to you being at the game at IG Field. Enjoy the rum hut. I'm sure you will. And
be around. Yeah,
take care, and we'll do this again sometime.
Absolutely, man. Thanks so much for having me on.
Of course, man. Vic Selby joined me on this edition of the True Blue Podcast, the pilot episode.
And that was Vic Selby. Enjoying the game, I'm sure, so far, as the Bombers just took a 7-3 lead here early in the Banjo Bowl contest. It started off with a Brett Lawther field goal for Saskatchewan to kick things off here. And the Bombers haven't watched any part of the game so far, but I'm sure that the Bombers marched down, had a pretty dominant drive to do so, hoping there was no penalties on the play to help the Bombers down, because then I'd be wrong in that statement there, but giving myself a pass because I haven't seen a part of the game yet. But yeah, it was Dakota Prukop rushing it in, a 1-yard rushing TD, and Castillo adding the point after to make it 7-3 for Winnipeg. And just want to add one last thing before we go into the tailgating portion of this show, where I'm going to be cooking some hot dogs. That's something that the Bombers have been so effective at, is having these successful drives to get down into the opposing team's red zone within the 5, and then at about the 1, they're able to punch it in with the dominant short game that this team has in the run game. But yeah, hoping that continues for the Bombers, and they're able to get more success like that as the game goes along, because this is one that would, not only be a win for pride for the Bombers, winning the season series against their rival, but they'd extend that 3-game Banjo Bowl winning streak to 4, and would also end up clinching a playoff spot, which would be really nice for the Bombers, so they can get into that mindset of continuing to build the good habits as we approach closer and closer to playoff time in the CFL. Coming up next on the True Blue podcast here on G Show Productions, to end things off, is a special segment here only for the Bombers podcast. It's exclusive to the True Blue podcast, and we're going to be calling it Just a simple name, working title for now. Tailgating with G Show. Coming up, I'm going to be back outside, and you guys are going to be seeing me attempting to cook a hot dog to end things off here for the pilot episode of the True Blue podcast. Stay tuned, everybody, for that coming up next. Alright, it's time to get into the tailgating portion of things in this episode. Long awaited. I'm excited for this. Today, I'm not going to be using a barbecue. I'm going to be using a fireplace like I mentioned, and as mentioned, I'm going to be cooking hot dogs. So, there's a lot of things you can put on hot dogs. I just like to keep it simple. We got, what's the brand here? Old Country hot dogs, Winnipeg Old Country. Quite a few. I'm only going to cook one. You can cook as many as you want, of course, especially if you're cooking for a big group of people. We got Dempster's hot dog buns, established in 1890, and the only ketchup brand you should be using is Heinz. None of that French's stuff. Not a big fan of that. But what we got to do first is light the fire, of course, so we'll cut to that. Alright, so I've been calling it a fireplace. It's a fire pit, I guess. You could call it whatever you want, but take a lighter, whatever lighter you have, some wood, of course, some paper to get this fire going, and what we're going to do, if you can come and get closer to this, we'll just start off by lighting one of these. Really try to get it started here. Be careful not to burn your fingers. But once you do this, your fire should start get going. And yeah, we'll cut to the next shot to go to the next step. What you want to do next is take whatever hot dogs you have, and like I said, I'm only going to be making one. And simply what you're going to do is, with whatever you have, I mean, pretty common stuff, but we are going to impale the hot dog so it's ready to cook. Now we'll head back over to the fire. Now what you're going to do next is take your hot dog, place it over the fire, and we'll proceed to cook it. Now I wanted to include tailgating into this podcast here because it's such a big part of the football culture, especially here in Winnipeg, Manitoba. I know that my mom's boss, they're big tailgaters, and they do get pretty creative with what they cook. We're keeping it simple here for today though. And yeah, as your hot dog is cooking, it would be preferable if it was a tinier ember. The flames are pretty high here, but yeah, you don't want to burn it. I ended up burning mine. Maybe you like it like that, maybe you don't. I usually like mine, not this cooked, but yeah, it is what it is. So as we continue to cook here, you want to make sure that each side is cooked pretty evenly, and this is a fast cook because the embers, the flame is pretty high, and yeah, I'd say that it is almost cooked. We'll cut to the final product in here in just a moment. Alright, and the last step, of course, take the hot dog off, put your stick or whatever you use wherever, and we'll take one of these Dempster's hot dog buns.
nice about these is they're already pre-cut. I'm sure a lot of these are like this, making it simple. And then take your ketchup. Of course, in my opinion, Heinz is the only way to go. My dog over here likes the taste of the stick that I use. And yeah, put as much ketchup as you want. I only like to put it on one side. That's a decent amount, and there you have it. It's a hot dog cooked for you to enjoy before the game and take in the great Banjo Bowl game, if that's what you choose to cook.
And you can enjoy your pre-game hot dog wherever you want. I'm going to enjoy it by this nice fire. But of course, if you're at a Winnipeg Blue Bombers game or a football game, you're going to enjoy it in the parking lot, by your car, wherever you may be. But yeah, that's going to do it for this edition, the pilot episode of the True Blue podcast, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers podcast on G Show Productions. Thank you to Vic Selby for coming on and being the guest in today's episode. Be quiet, Jack. We are recording here, of course, still, but a special thanks to our sponsors in Mid-Canada Fasteners and Tools and Terraco for being the sponsors of today's episode and supporting G Show Productions. Be sure to check out their websites, of course, that we have down below on the screen, and let us know in the comments on our YouTube who you guys think is taking this one. Will it be the Big Blue bouncing back, or will it be Saskatchewan? And of course, thank you to you, the viewer, for tuning into this episode as well. That's going to be it for me, Graham, the G Show Forsyth. Until Friday night, folks, we'll see you then. Enjoy the game and enjoy some good food too. Take care, everybody.